Hi there, this is Patricia from patriciafenty.com, and today I have a tutorial on how to crochet this super easy scarf. This is totally suited for beginners, and I'm calling it the Hugs and Kisses scarf because the stitch we're using is a variation of a cross stitch. So we have a cross stitch and sort of an opening here. So you have your X's and O's, X's and O's. So I thought that was a fun name. So it literally is a one row repeat all the way along, aside from setting up the initial row. And the fun thing about this scarf pattern is that I'm going to show you 4 different ways that you can finish it off. So this scarf could be unisex in that you can make the scarf and you'll just have a row of single crochet on each end. Very basic, very simple, and it can then be a man's scarf without it being too frilly fluffy. The second thing I'll show you is how you can put tassels onto that row of single crochet, and then that will make it a little bit more snazzy. The third thing I'll show you is how to do this fan stitch with a picot, which makes the scarf a little more fancy. And then the fourth way is to actually add some tassels to those picots, which can be really fun. So this scarf is great because it gives you 4 different finishes and everything from very simple to a little bit more involved. Now this scarf requires more than 1 ball of yarn. I'll show you in the supplies. I'm using this self-striping yarn, which really makes a beautiful scarf. So we use a little over 1 ball of yarn, so you'll have some yarn left over, and I have a tutorial for this hat which would match perfectly, so you could have 2 balls of yarn and make a hat and scarf. This is super easy, beginner friendly. I'll put a link to that below. And yeah, let's talk about supplies. Now what you'll need for this project is some number 4 medium weight yarn. I'm using the Lion brand Ferris wheel self-striping yarn. It's vintage carousel. I love this color. It's such a lovely self-striping yarn. So number 4 medium weight yarn, it's acrylic. This is a 3-ounce ball or 85 grams, 270 yards or 247 meters. Now they claim this is enough yarn to make a scarf, and there's a pattern in here. But for the design that I'm making, you'll need about 1 1/4 balls of this yarn, especially if you want to do tassels. So 1 1/4 balls of yarn, that will be roughly, I'm just going to do the math in my head, approximately 340 yards and about 310 meters or so. Now I do have a pattern for that matching hat, which would be great to use the extra yarn for, but you could make mitts, or if you wanted to make 2 scarves, you could use 3 balls of yarn, and that would make 2 scarves. So like that. You'll need a 4mm or a G6 crochet hook, and optionally you can use a 5mm or an H8 crochet hook for the foundation chain. And you need some scissors and a darning needle. Now I recorded this pattern using this yarn here, and when I went to edit, it was actually too dark to really see how the stitch pattern worked. So I'm going to demonstrate using this light gray yarn so that it's easier to see. And just for your information, the gauge for this pattern is 15 stitches equals 4 inches or 10 centimeters, and 6.75 rows equals 4 inches or 10 centimeters. The size of the scarf varies depending on the finish you choose, and I showed those sizes in the introduction. So you're going to start with a slip knot. So if you're new to crochet, I do have my beginner crochet series that shows you everything you need to know to create this pattern. And if you are new to crochet, and if you tend to have tight tension when you're crocheting, just go up a size with your crochet hook. So this is the 4mm or G6, so you can go up to the 5mm or H8 or whatever that is for your foundation chain. use that for the foundation chain in row 1. So put the slip knot on your hook and you're going to create a foundation chain of 21. The multiples of this pattern is 2 plus 1. So you can add or subtract 2 chains to make the scarf wider or narrower. So yarn over and pull that through the loop, yarn over and pull that through the loop, and that's a chain stitch. So we're just going to chain 21, and if you are using the 4mm or G6 crochet hook, you want to make this foundation chain really loose so that it doesn't sort of be too tight at the bottom. So go ahead and chain 21 and I'll see you at the end. All right, so there's my chain 21, and even using this hook, I'm still doing a loose stitch, and for guidance, that leaves me at 5 3/4, so stretched out, that'll be 6 inches, so that's 21 chains. So now we'll start row 1, and carrying on with the larger hook, you'll chain 1, that's your turning chain, and we're going to single crochet back into the chain stitches. So turn the chain over and you'll work into these back bumps of the chain stitch. The back has these bumps, and that's what you're going to work into. So not into your turning chain, going into the first bump, you go under that stitch, yarn over, pull your yarn through, yarn over and pull through the 2 loops, and that's a single crochet. So going into the next bump, the next stitch, yarn over, pull your yarn through, you've got 2 loops on your hook, yarn over through 2 loops, and then again into the next bump. And we're staying with the larger crochet hook just to do this foundation chain in row 1 in a nice loose tension. So go ahead, carry on doing a single crochet all the way along, and at the end of the row you'll have 21 single crochets. So go ahead and do that, and I will see you there. Now coming to the end of row 1, the row of single crochets into the back bumps of each chain, you'll have 21 single crochets, or whatever your multiples were. So if you did 18 as your even number of multiples, and 1 extra would be 19, plus 1 for the turning chain. And then if you went the other way, instead of 21 single crochets, you'd have 23 plus 1 for your turning chain. So whatever that number is, whether it's 19, 21, or 23, once you've done your row of single crochets, that's how many single crochets you should have at the end. Now at this point, if you've been using the larger crochet hook, you can switch back to the 4mm crochet hook or the G6. So turn your work and chain 3, or chain 3 and turn your work. It's totally up to you. And that counts as your first double crochet. Now for this row, what we're going to do is we're going to come to the base of that chain, and you'll see there's 1, 2, 3 chains. That's considered your first stitch there. You'll skip that, and into the next stitch, you'll work a double crochet. So yarn over, go under both loops of that stitch, pull the yarn through. You'll have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Then what you're going to do is you'll do yarn over and do a double crochet into the stitch that you skipped, the one behind that double crochet. So go behind it or in front of it, or however you want to call that, and you can turn your work over to make sure you're going under both loops. So picking up both loops, grab the yarn from behind, pull it through. There's 3 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and that first stitch is a little bit tight and a little bit hard to see, but you'll see better here. So now you don't go into that stitch that first double crochet went into. You'll skip the stitch after that, and then the second stitch you will do a double crochet, again going under both loops. Then you'll work a double crochet into the stitch that you skipped. the one behind that. So yarn over and going into that skip stitch. And again, you can turn your work over, making sure you're going under both loops. Grab your yarn from behind. You have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And that's how you make the cross stitch. So you'll skip a stitch, and into the second stitch, you work your double crochet, and then you work your double crochet into the skipped stitch. So yarn over, going back into that skip stitch, flipping it over, making sure you're going under both loops, pull the yarn through and do your double crochet. So you're going to work that cross stitch all the way along, and at the end of this row you'll have 10 double crochet cross stitches. So working into the skipped stitch. So we'll see you there at the end. So coming to the end of row 2, you'll have 3 stitches left. You'll have done 9 double crochet cross stitches. So you work 1 more, so that will give you 10 of the cross stitches. And then into the last stitch, you'll just work a double crochet. And that's the end of row 2, and that's the hard bit over. So for row 3, you'll turn your work, and this is where the pattern repeat begins, and it gets much easier. So chain 3, and that counts as a double crochet. Then you'll skip a stitch and start working your cross stitch all the way along. So skip a stitch, and into the second stitch you'll work your double crochet, which is into the top of the cross stitch from the previous row. And then you work your double crochet into the skipped stitch, and again you can turn the work over to make sure you're picking up both loops from the previous row and do your double crochet. So you're literally working each cross stitch into the top of the cross stitch from the previous row. So you'll skip a stitch and you'll do a double crochet into the second stitch, and then work a double crochet into the skipped stitch. Just like that. And again, skip a stitch and work a double crochet into the second stitch, and then do a double crochet into the stitch that you skipped. And so you're just working these cross stitches into the top of each cross stitch from the previous row. So go ahead and I will see you at the end of the row. All right, so coming to the end of row 3, I have 1 more cross stitch to work into, and the turning chain from the previous row. So working this last cross stitch into the top of the cross stitch from the previous row, and again you'll have 10 cross stitch clusters in this row, and this is just a little bit tricky. So what you want to do is work a double crochet into the 3rd chain of that turning chain from the previous row, and you're wanting to pick up 2 loops from that chain and just work a double crochet into that chain. And that, my friends, is the pattern repeat, and you literally just repeat row 3 over and over and over again. So I'll just show you how to start it again. Turn your work, chain 3, and skip a stitch and do your double crochet. And then do a double crochet into this stitch that you skipped. And just like that, creating your cross stitch. And then skip a stitch, do a double crochet into that stitch, and do a double crochet into the skipped stitch. And that is the pattern. And it is so easy, and it crochets up very quickly. And it looks so lovely. I'm really impressed with the simplicity of this stitch, and yet how lovely it looks. So go ahead and I'll just finish off this row and show you how it looks at the end, and I'll bring in the other scarf too. Okay, so coming to the end of row 4, I just finished my last cross stitch cluster and doing that last double crochet into the 3rd chain of that chain 3 from the previous row. And that is the end of row 4, which is a repeat of row 3. And so now you would turn your work and carry on repeating row 3 over and over again until the scarf is the length that you like. And you can see what a really beautiful pattern it is, and why I call it hugs and kisses. It's like XOXO. And I'll just bring in the one with the yarn that we're actually using, so you can see here how beautiful the pattern looks with that self-striping yarn, but also how it looks in a solid color yarn. I mean, the solid color looks really beautiful as well. So whether you use a solid color yarn or a self-striping yarn, it really doesn't matter. So carry on and make the scarf as long as you like, using as much yarn as you like. And there will be one final row to finish off, and before we get there, I'll also show you how to join on a new ball of yarn. So here I am. I'm just beginning row 85, and I'm at 54 inches. So I'm going into my 2nd ball of yarn here, and this is totally up to you. If you're using a self-striping yarn, you may want to just begin with whatever yarn comes out of the center, the color, but I want to match the colors up so that the pattern carries on in with the same gradation. So what I've done is I've pulled out the yarn that is not the right color. So you can see here it's the purple, and then going into the red purple, and then going into this greeny tan color. So I cut that section out, which I can use for tassels. And so I'm beginning with the same color yarn that I finished off with. So here I am, I'm working my way along, and I'm just getting to the end of the tail. So you can join on in a couple of different ways. You can do a magic knot. I'll put a link for that below, or you can join on as you go. So you'll start your next double crochet and leave that bit of tail there, and then grab the new yarn, and rather than grabbing the yarn you've been working with, you're just going to pull in the yarn off the new ball and start working with that. Oh, that got a little loosey-goosey. You just kind of want to keep those ends all nice and snug. So leave a bit of a tail, pull that through the 2 loops, and grab both your tails and hold on to them and kind of snug them down. So I'm holding both the tails, yarn over and pull through the 2 loops, finishing the double crochet and kind of snug that down, and yarn over and carry on doing your crochet stitches. And so you can just tuck those tails in behind and darn them in later, and then you'll just carry on working your double crochet cross stitch pattern just like that. And you see there's the tails here, and again you can just darn those in later. So there you go, carry on, and I will see you at the very last row to show you how to finish this off. Okay, here we are. I've completed 100 rows of the pattern stitch, so 101 including our beginning row of single crochet, and this is now 60 inches in length. So of course you can carry on and make this any length you like, but I'll show you how you can finish once you get it to the length that you like. So you will chain 1 and turn your work, and then all you're going to do is do a row of single crochet starting in the very first stitch and going under both loops of each stitch. You'll just single crochet all the way along till you get to the end of the row, and you should have 21 stitches at the end, single crochets. And so at the very end of this row, make sure you get a single crochet into that third chain of the turning chain from the previous row for your final stitch of this row. Now at this point, if you wanted, you could just do a chain one and fasten off and darn in your tail ends, and that would be the end of that, and you could be finished with the scarf. I'll just zoom this out so you can see a bit better. So if you wanted, you could just finish the scarf like this, and of course darn in all your tail ends, and the edges would be finished like this, and that would be easy peasy, super simple, and a very fun scarf. But I will show you the 3 more ways to finish off this scarf, and the next one I'll show you is how to do the tassels, and that's where you would do a chain one to fasten off and darn in your tail ends. Now to do tassels, we'll be putting them into the row of single crochet and starting in the very first stitch. So you can space your tassels however you like. You can do however many strands you like. I'm going to do 3 stands doubled over, which will give 6 strands in every third stitch. So that will give me 7 sets of tassels and 3 strands, so I'll need 21 strands for each side. So of course you can put them in every other one, you can do whatever you like. So all you need is a jig of some sort. I'm using a card here. This is a little over 4 inches or 10 centimeters. It's 4 1/4. You could also just cut a piece of cardboard that's 4 inches, that would work, and just use that for your jig, and you just wrap the yarn around for as many strands as you would need. So I'm just going to do a few of them here just to demonstrate. So that's 10, and just for demonstration purposes, but you'd want to carry on and wrap more. And I find that an 8-inch strand, which gives you roughly a 3.5-inch tassel, is a nice length, but you can make your tassels any length you like. So then you can just go into the opening of the card and give that a snip. And there you go. You have some tassels. Now, you can use like multiple color of strands if you like, or you can use all the same color. It's totally up to you. So you can take 3 strands, line them up evenly, and then fold them in half, and starting in that very first stitch, going in from the back with your crochet hook, grab the center of the strands and pull that through, and pull it through enough that you can get your fingers in there, and keep the ends as even as possible, and then just put your finger and thumb in the middle of the loop and pull the tail through and snug it up. Just like that, and just snug them up nice and evenly, and there you go. So I'm going to put the tassels on there, and I'll come back and show you what you'll do after that. Welcome back. So there are all the tassels in place, and then what you want to do, you can trim them and just eyeball it and do it that way, or if you want to be more particular, you can use a ruler and just sort of pull them flat, lay them, kind of comb them out, and then use the ruler as a guide to make them nice and straight. And just give it a little trim. I'm not going to trim all of it here. You get the idea. You can just trim them nice and evenly. And that's your tassels, and of course you're going to repeat that on the other side. Now, one thing I do recommend with tassels is to use a little bit of fabric glue on the knot of the tassels. There's like fray check or something like that, and because tassels can come unraveled, so the fabric glue helps to secure that. So that, my dear friends, is how you do tassels. So next we're going to do the fan edge with the picot. I just changed the background color because I was having problems with the light. So now to do the fan stitch with the Picot, you will have finished your row of single crochet and not fastened off, and will just carry on with a chain 1 and turn your work. And unfortunately we're into some dark color here, but I'll be explaining it. So you'll do a single crochet at the very base of that stitch. That very first stitch, you'll do a single crochet. Skip a stitch. You can see this is a stitch I worked into because I was taking photographs for the blog. So skip a stitch, and into this stitch here, you'll work 3 double crochets. And we're starting to work that fan stitch with the Picot. So 3 double crochets, then you'll chain 3, and then at the base of this chain, you'll come back down to the base of the chain, and there's 2 front loops at the base of the chain, and you'll do a slip stitch. So yarn over, pull through those 2 loops and the loop on your hook, and you've created your Picot. Now you'll do 2 more double crochets into that same stitch to complete the fan. And then you'll skip a stitch and do a single crochet into the next stitch. And that's the first fan stitch with the Picot. And you'll kind of have to flatten that out. And there you go. So you'll repeat that again. So you'll skip a stitch, and into the next stitch, you'll repeat that same fan stitch. So 3 double crochets. Oops, need some more yarn here. So that's 1 double crochet, 2 double crochets, and 3 double crochets. And then chain 3 for the Picot, and then come down to the base of that chain stitch and put your hook into those 2 posts in the front of that chain stitch, and do a slip stitch through those 2 loops and the loop on your hook. And then do 2 more double crochets into that same stitch to complete the fan. And then skip a stitch and do a single crochet into the second stitch. So you'll repeat that 3 more times, and you'll finish at the end of this row with a single crochet. So coming to the end of this row, you should have 2 stitches left after doing your fan stitch, and you'll do a single crochet into the 3rd chain of that chain 3 from the previous row. And then you can do a chain 1 to fasten off, or you can just fasten off here. I always like to do a chain 1. It just kind of puts a knot in the stitch, which is nice. So pull that through, snug that up, and then you'll darn in your tail end, and that is the fan stitch with the Picot all done. All right, so what you want to do for the other side is make sure you have the scarf facing the same side up in order to do this finish. And the way you can do that is just lay the scarf out and making sure you have the same side up. So on this side, we have to join on a new piece of yarn. Now this is the yarn that I pulled out of the center to match up the colors in the second ball. And so I actually have the same color, which is at the beginning of this row. So I'm going to use that. But you can use any part of the yarn color that you like. So create a slip knot, put that on your hook, and go into the first stitch of this row, and you'll join on with a single crochet. So yarn over, pull the yarn through the loop, flip your tail over, and do a single crochet. Then you'll skip a stitch And then you'll work your fan stitch with the picot and just work the pattern all the way across just like you did on the other side. So that's the only difference. You just have to join on with a single crochet in that very first stitch. And so there's my chain 3, going into those front posts, doing a slip stitch and through there, and 2 more double crochets in that same stitch. And the color of this yarn is lighter, so it's a little easier to see how this works out. And then you'll skip a stitch and do a single crochet into that next stitch. And then you'll carry on and work 4 more of those all the way across, and finishing off with a single crochet in the very last stitch. And so here we go. I've hand steamed the scarf, and here's how it looks with the fans in the picots, and that in itself is quite lovely. So now I will show you how to do the tassels so you can see the 4th way to finish. To do the tassels for the picots, what you want to make sure is you want to put the crochet hook in from the back of the picot, and you want to go in the middle of the chain 3, like in the middle of the picot. You don't want to go into any stitches. You want to go into sort of the loop in the center of that chain 3. And in this case, I used 4 strands of tassels. You could use 5, you could make them longer, you could make them shorter, whatever you want to do. And so you just put the tassels into the end of each picot and snug them up, and there we go. And for these ones, I'm just going to eyeball them and just take out the real obvious ones, and then leave it so that it's not super perfectly finished off. So it's just a little bit imperfect on the ends. And just like that. And there we go. So there are the tassels on the picots. And I think that looks really fun. And again, you can use fabric glue on the knots so they don't unravel. So there you go. There is the Hugs and Kisses scarf, totally suited for beginners. It's such a beautiful stitch, very easy and quick to work up, and you have 4 different ways that you can finish the bottom edges, which then if you're making these for Christmas presents, you can make 4 scarves and they'll all look different. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more creative and inspiring videos.